this video, I want to share some little activities that I'm doing and ways that I'm thinking that are just making my life a little better and making me a little bit happier. These are the kind of things that seem really small when you hear them, and when you implement them, they're totally actionable to do, but over time, they can be life-changing. My favorite kind of tips. Mentally rehearse yourself being the person that you want to be. If you want to learn to play the trumpet, you have to practice. If you want to be a great climber, you have to put in the hours. Do the same thing over and over again until you get it, until it's synced in. The same goes for learning literally any mental or social skill. If you want to be that person that sets boundaries so gracefully, I've met these people, they're incredible, you have to practice. If you want to be that person that responds to criticism with ease and grace, you have to practice. But unlike things like climbing, basketball, there's not like a gym for boundary setting or responding to criticism or not procrastinating. Unless you want to go into a toxic environment, which probably isn't the best way to do things. In some forms of psychotherapy, they help people to overcome anxiety through desensitization, like exposure therapy. So for me, I used to be really anxious about making phone calls. And when I say anxious, I mean like I would write down a little script, I might practice it beforehand. I definitely cried after picking up a phone call at my first job. I would actually get so anxious that when I was listening to people on the line, their words would sound like gibberish to me because I was so anxious, so I'd have to ask them to repeat what they'd said. Thinking back now, it was really debilitating. Then I worked in admin. So in this admin role, I'd have to pick up like 5 to 10 phone calls a day with totally random questions that I often wouldn't know the answer to. I'd have to go to someone else to get the answer. It was unintentional self-imposed exposure therapy, and it was in a really safe environment because I was a trainee, so everyone treated me like I was a kid, which worked out really well in that circumstance. Trainees can definitely get away with being anxious and a little confused. I can say with absolute sincerity now, phone calls don't mean a thing to me. Couldn't care less, completely desensitized because I exposed myself to so many phone calls in such a safe environment. But usually if you are going through a formal process to desensitize yourself, you're gonna be doing some visualizing. I think there's some AI virtual reality stuff in some instances. There's really nothing safer than sitting on your comfy cozy couch in your comfy cozy environment, imagining that bug that you're terrified of crawling on you. And when you're imagining that scenario that feels horrible to you, that's when you get to practice using your coping strategies, doing your deep breathing, maybe self-coaching yourself, reframing. By being the person that we want to be, which often involves doing things that make us anxious in safe conditions, we learn to respond in the way that we want to respond. If you suck at setting boundaries, at bouncing back when you get into a slump, at not procrastinating, at not leaning into gossip, like whatever it is that you struggle with in yourself, try mentally rehearsing it first. When you mentally rehearse, it should still feel uncomfortable, but you're in such a safe space where you can practice those self-compassion skills, those reframing skills, whatever the skills are that you want to practice in that scenario, and it feels a lot easier to do. Dan Siegel, in his book Mindsight, wrote, "Under the right conditions, neural firing can lead to strengthening of synaptic connections. These conditions include repetition, emotional arousal, novelty, and the careful focus of attention." This is a mixture of the careful focus of attention and repetition. Mentally rehearsing the same response over and over in your mind. Someone is going to hate the way that I'm describing this, but connections are gonna fire in your mind. They're gonna become easier to access. They'll wire together. It's a good, safe way of practicing being the person that you want to be. Avoid avoidance. So in a study of students who achieved poor grades, there were some students who simply accepted the fact that they had poor grades. And those students were high in self-compassion. The other students took part in what psychologists call avoidance-oriented coping. They tried not to think about their bad grades because their bad grades made them feel bad. You know that feeling when you kind of wince at something? So it could be bad grades, it could be poor performance in an interview, it could be something embarrassing that you did, it could be a part of yourself that you feel ashamed about, it could be behavior that you feel ashamed about. These are almost things that you flinch away from when they come to mind. The author of the book The Inner Game of Tennis, which is a book entirely about the mental game of playing tennis, but it's really good, wrote this: "The first step is to see your strokes as they are. They must be perceived clearly. This can be done only when personal judgment is absent. As soon as the stroke is seen clearly and accepted as it is, a natural and speedy process of change begins. To see your strokes as they are, there is no need to attribute goodness or badness to them. You can notice exactly how far out the ball lands without labeling it a bad event. By ending judgment, you don't avoid seeing what is. Ending judgment means that you neither add nor subtract from the facts before your eyes. There is this sweet spot between self-criticism, self-loathing, and self-love, and that is self-acceptance. acceptance. Avoid avoidance in your day-to-day life when you do things that you aren't proud of, when things that are embarrassing happen, when you get grades that you're not super happy with. Instead, practice non-judgment and self-acceptance. As soon as a way of being, a way of acting is seen clearly and as it is, a natural and speedy process of change begins. This feels a little bit less tangible, a little bit less actionable, but to make it more actionable, turn it into a practice. At the end of the day, you can review through your day and think of anything that makes you flinch a little. Any way that you behave that you're like, ugh. Practice non-judgment, practice self-acceptance. Before I talk about the next little thing that I've been doing to make life better, this video is sponsored by Canva. I actually recently spent like an entire day in Canva just making these templates that look like this and this and this, and they were so easy to create because Canva truly has no learning curve. In Canva, you can upload, edit, and schedule socials all in one place. Whether you are working from home, you're editing and you are scheduling, or you are out and about, you can use the Canva app to edit and share photos. You can upload 5 gigs of storage space, and they also have their own content library that is filled with so many beautiful images. There's 250,000 free photos, as well as little like drawings, animations that you can add to your content. I use this kind of stuff all the time. So I thought I'd give you a quick look at how I use some of the photo editing features in Canva. So this is the start of the thumbnail for this video. They have a whole bunch of filters here. I'm gonna go for Belvedere, and I'm also just gonna up the general brightness, contrast, all of those things. Then what I usually use is the background remover, which is part of the pro plan. So now we've got that, and I'm also going to add a glow. She's glowing. But now I feel like things are looking a little bit messy, so I am thinking about using the autofocus tool. And those are just some of the tools that I use to edit my actual photos in Canva and also add some design. Most of the Canva features are free, but for a low-cost subscription, you get all of these great things like Canva Video, the background remover tool, which I use all of the time, the content scheduler, and so much more. Team up and save with Canva Pro for just $12.95 a month for up to 5 people, so you can add your team members in there as well. Plus, you get a free 45-day extended trial using my link in the description down below. Create a personal guide to your happiness. Something that I think should be a basic requirement for everyone to carry around is a little basic guide to their happiness. All of the things that when they do them consistently, they are their happiest self. This note is experimental. This is a live note, so this is ever changing. You add to it, you take away from it, you clarify it. You refer to it when you're feeling low and you ask, okay, where am I going wrong? You check in on it when you want to make sure that you are on track. It's a personal guide to your happiness. It can have frivolous seeming stuff on it, like getting a nice latte once a week. It can have bigger stuff like not drinking alcohol, as long as it exists. This is my personal guide to my happiness, and it was actually created based on my guide to my unhappiness. That's a really good place to start. If you don't know what it is that makes you happy, look first to what makes you unhappy. Create a personal guide to your unhappiness. Flip it around and create a personal guide to your happiness. Honestly, for most people, the things that are going to be on your list are going to be very simple and achievable. Mine has things like see friends 2-3 times a week, work at coffee shops, finish working at 4 p.m. But when I'm not ticking off at least like 80% of these boxes, there is a noticeable difference to things like my general happiness, but also things like my creativity, my productivity, my motivation, all go down. Something you can also do is create this list and send it along to your partners, your family, friends, anyone who is close enough to deserve having this list. When you feel like trash, you can both look at your lists and be like, okay, what's going on? Self-coach from an outsider's perspective. Something that I actually talked about in a video I put out a long time ago on what to do when you have zero motivation is self-coaching. So this is something that I do if I'm extremely unmotivated, if it is a day where I'm struggling to get myself off the couch, if I'm struggling to get myself out of bed. We're talking a low functioning day. Self-coaching in that instance is one of my coping mechanisms. So I would say, Michelle, all we gotta do is pick up the plate, take it to the sink. Okay, Michelle, now let's take the plate, put it in the dishwasher. And according to experiments run by Ethan Kross, the author of the book Chatter, that is one of the fastest ways to get emotional perspective. This is called self-distancing, and it feels very hacky, but it also works. To start making this a habit in your life, you might want to just try using it for a few days, but just for everyday things, not when you're feeling severely demotivated. You kind of just want to make a habit of using it in day-to-day life before you start using it when you're at your lowest. Create an environment for future you. So something that we've all heard, said at this stage is design your environment for your goals, for your habits. Put the guitar in the living room if you want to practice more guitar. Put the books on the bedside table if you want to read more books. But consider taking it a step further. Shape your environment entirely for who you want to be. This is something I've been trying to do lately, and it can start with a simple sketch via Eileen from Lavender. I love this exercise. So this is drawing out a future version of yourself. The you that you want to be in a year or in 3 years. Maybe she's more confident. Maybe she reads more books. Maybe she ignites more conversations. And maybe she's more interesting. Whatever it is that she is, put it on your future you map. Then ask yourself, what would the environment of this future person look like? I actually really love Erin Henry's take on this. She's a business coach. She has a YouTube channel. I'll link it down below. She's great. She calls it becoming the coolest person that you know. I've talked about this before in terms of becoming the person that you would most want to be friends with. So for me, the coolest person I know, the kind of person I would want to be friends with, she's always learning. She is always growing. So for me, that means in my environment, I need to make sure that I always have access to books. I feel like in the past year, I have become a booked fiend, and I've always read a lot of books. If you follow my channel, like I'm definitely a reader, but like I've never read so much in my life, and I love it. She has to be a little bit artsy, a little bit creative. So for me, that means that there are crafts in my environment. She's a journaler. She is a feeler. So for me, that means that I'm setting up shortcuts so that I'm journaling. I realized recently the coolest person that I know would definitely have cool outfits, but definitely not in a super micro trendy way. So that just means that I have some cool individual thrifted pieces in my wardrobe. Design an environment with future you in mind. How can you become the coolest person you know, and what would the coolest person you know have in their environment? See discomfort as progress. In a study of 557 adults who were attending an amateur improv comedy situation, they had to partake in an exercise that was obviously pretty awkward, pretty embarrassing. I think that's improv full stop. Half of the participants were told that the goal was to feel awkward and to feel uncomfortable, that that's what you wanted to feel during this improv workshop. The other half were just given normal instructions on how to carry out this improv exercise. The exercises were actually recorded, and the participants were rated on things like persistence, how long do people take part in the exercise before they passed along to someone else, and how much risk they took when it was their turn doing improv. The participants who were told to pursue awkwardness, that was their goal, tended to be more persistent and take more risks, which researchers found to mean that they were more motivated. They were also more likely to believe that they had achieved their goals during the exercise. A similar study was for participants who were told to take part in a journaling exercise, but they were journaling about something that was quite heavily emotional. Half of the participants were told that the goal of the exercise was to feel uncomfortable, was to feel maybe awkward, that those feelings were a sign that the writing was working. After finishing up, unsurprisingly, the people who had that goal of feeling awkward, of feeling uncomfortable, they were the ones that ended up believing that that exercise had helped them to grow more emotionally. It helped them to develop coping skills, and they were also much more likely to do it again. When you're pursuing growth, make it a priority to see discomfort and awkwardness as the goal, to see it as a sign that things are working. If you're feeling uncomfortable, if you're feeling awkward, when you're doing that thing that is out of your comfort zone, it means that you are pushing through and you are making progress. To grow self-compassion, practice the phrase, redo, please. So this is from the book The Courage Habit, and the author writes, "This is the most effective tool for working with self-critic voices that I have ever come across." And all it is the phrase, redo, please. Whenever your mind is saying something to you that feels disrespectful, that feels out of pocket, that feels unnecessary, simply say the phrase, redo, please. You can add on to that by saying, look, I am open to hearing what you are saying as my inner critic, but I want to hear it in a way that is respectful. This isn't like thought replacement of replacing a thought that is super negative with something that's super positive. It might be replacing something that's super negative with something that's pretty neutral. Your inner critic might say, you're an idiot. You might say, redo, please. And it could come back with, what you just did was dumb. You might then say, let's redo that again. And your inner critic could come back with, look, the decision that you made probably wasn't the best one, but you're learning from it and you're growing from it. Something along those lines. We're not talking positive thought replacement. This is more like training yourself to be more self-accepting, or training yourself to be more neutral towards your behavior, training yourself to be more self-compassionate. If you liked this video, you'll probably like my video on 7 ways to change your life in 1 year. I'm gonna have that video linked down below as well as on the screen. I appreciate you so very much, and I will see you soon.